Let's continue talking about your fretboard for your acoustic guitar. Review what we've done so far. We made sure our slots were all deep enough to accept the tang of the fret wire. We installed all our fret wires. We've trimmed them flush. We filed them flush. And then we dressed the ends. Now it's time to glue it to our neck. The neck has totally been done with finish and all that sanding and all that good stuff. Just like with a lot of things that we talk about on the guitar, this is an area where you're going to have some debate on who you talk with and how you do this and what exactly it is that you're gluing. The first thing is you'll notice I have my truss rod installed into my guitar. Now, some people will tell you put a piece of tape on the truss rod. That way glue does not get onto the truss rod itself. Or somehow remove it, soften the glue with heat or whatever method you would do. Remove this, get to this, and fix your truss rod. In my opinion, if you have something wrong with your truss rod, your guitar is in a lot more trouble than I'm comfortable messing around with. And what are the odds if I try and get a knife in there when I heat it up, whatever? So that's one reason why I will put glue all along this. Another one is a friend of mine out in Washington. He is awesome at making guitars. And he made one of his guitars just spectacular looking. And when somebody was playing it or when they were walking around with it, they heard a rattle. And they kept figuring out, like, what is that? What's that rattle? And then they figured it out that he doesn't, up to that point, he hadn't glued in the truss rod. He was one of those guys that would put tape over it. And the truss rod, actually the wood softened or something, and the truss rod got loose and started rattling in there. So those two reasons are why I'm just gonna coat this with glue. You make your own decision. You wanna do some asking around, some advice on the internet, forums, things like that, go right ahead. We talked about that we finish on the neck. Make sure you have no finish on your glue surface. If you need to, sand this up and clean that. Same thing with your fretboard. When I worked on this, I had this covered with blue tape to make sure no oil and nothing else got on here. Next step, we're gonna get some rubber bands that are just for working with guitars. You can get them from StewMac. And also I'm gonna get some clamps, and I'm gonna be doing it here in the vise, which I think is really handy. You can clamp it to a table. So our next step is actually gluing. Before we glue it, I forgot to mention, we need this line here. That's where my fretboard is going to end. And so we're leaving a space, and that space is for your string nut. So you can put it up on here and make a mark. If you want to try gluing your fretboard while the nut is sitting in there, you can try and do that. Typically, people don't glue these in. The string pressure will hold it in place, but if you wanted to, you could do some CA glue on the bottom of this and glue it in place. The issue with that is if there's ever an issue with this, these are easy enough to pop out. So if you did glue it, you could run into an issue with that, whereas typically I'll just place them in there and use that string tension. But the point of that is that is where our fretboard is going to end, right on that line, or start, however you want to think of it. I have my neck in the vise. You see I have the headstock in the vise. That's what's holding it. This is how I like to do it. Make sure there's nothing in your vise. If you need to, put some paper towel in there. You don't want to mess up that headstock that you just spent all that time making pretty the last couple weeks. On the underside of my fretboard, I have marked where my heel is and where the bottom of the neck is, because I don't need any glue here right now. That would actually be bad, because if that glue were to dry, now I have to sand that later and things like that. So don't have any glue below that line. In other words, like usual, I'm going to take the glue and try and thin it out. This helps you get a nice glue surface, glue seam, and also it can show you where you might need some more or where you have too much, where squeeze out is going to be a problem. as we talk about squeeze out, you don't want a ton of squeeze out because you already have your neck nice and pretty with your oil or whatever it is that you put on it. So be careful about just how much glue you do use with this. Paper towel is always handy, that's a good thing. So what I'm going to do now is any that's squeezed out already, I'm going to wipe off. And the other thing I tend to do, which you can see here, is I'll take either my finger or my paper towel and I'll go around and almost make a border around the edge where there is no glue. That way, when squeeze out does happen, it has some place to go instead of just squeezing out the side. It's a little technique that I just kind of developed. I don't know if it's good or bad, but it's what I like to do. All right, I'm now gonna put this on here and line it up with that line that we talked about for our string nut. And now I'm gonna take one of my clamps and put it on here. And as usual, make sure your clamps are clean, that they're not gonna mark up anything. And on my fretboard in place. What I can do is take my string nut and it should be able to fit in there, but not sloppy. So if you need to, you can slide your fretboard up into place. Also, notice that my clamp, you can't really see it from that angle, but my clamp is not on fret wire. That is a bad thing if that happens. It can actually damage how you've installed your fret wire. I'm going to take one of my guitar rubber bands and I'm going to make it an oval. I'm going to take one end and tuck it into the other. All right, so this end is a big hole or circle. I'm going to take this one and put it through. And now pull that tight. And now I'm going to start wrapping this. And as I do this, I'm getting some squeeze out, which we talked about. I don't want a lot, but that's also letting me know that I'm getting a lot of good pressure. If you don't have these clamps, these rubber band clamps, or you don't feel like spending the money on them and ordering them, whatever, you could use a bunch of these up and down the fretboard. The issue I have with that is you're going to end up getting on fret wire with it. And that worries me about clamping on fret wire. All right, now that I've gotten to the end, I'm going to take another one of these down here. And as I clamp this, it's actually going to clamp the rubber band too, holding it in place. Now, the nice thing about the rubber band, nice equal pressure along my fretboard, but also it should have self-centered the fretboard. So if I feel this, I shouldn't feel an overhang on either side. If I did, that means my fretboard needs to be shifted a little bit. So now, anywhere that I do have squeeze out, I can go ahead and clean that up. Take it out of there, I'm going to look at it. Is it pretty straight? It looks good to me. No, not too bad back here with squeeze out, which is a good thing. If there is, go ahead and clean that as well. But if you wanted to, you could take a second band and do the same thing. Now I'm going to start at this end and work my way that way. And now with this one, I'm going to try hitting the places where the first one wasn't.
And that really should ensure me that I have excellent clamping surface.
Pretty simple process. I really like doing it this way. I've had really good success. The idea that the rubber bands help adjust that fretboard to get it even. You get nice good pressure with it and coverage. But like I said, if you don't have those and you have some of these F clamps or quick release clamps and you want to use a bunch of them, you could certainly try that as well. If you had your string nut out, make sure you put this in a safe place and you don't lose it. I would not leave it in here. But it's a good idea to check that again, that does fit in there. And it looks pretty cool too. It kind of gives you a peek into the future of what that's gonna look like. Make sure my name is now off of both of these. So make sure you rewrite your name, and I'm gonna rewrite my scale length of my fretboard, which got covered. I'd already written it down here on the heel, but it doesn't hurt to put it there because we need that for when we glue our bridge on. Make sure that you know what your scale length is, right? Okay, that's it for gluing your fretboard onto the neck. Your next step for that would be dry fitting it into the body of your guitar and then gluing it into your guitar or bolting it, however you're gonna attach it. So exciting stuff is here and we're getting really close to the end, which is really cool.